So General Convention is, I've shared this when I talk about the Vestry Leadership Day and I do teaching. We as Episcopalians share our baptismal authority. So essentially, you as a parish share it with the people you send to the diocesan level to be part of the convention, be part of committees, etc. And then we as a diocesan convention, when we gather, we share our baptismal authority with a wider church. And so we elect people as deputies to General Convention. And General Convention is our legislative body of the Episcopal Church. It's where things happen. It's every 3 years. And it's made up of 2 houses. It's very much modeled like our government, a bicameral government, democratic process. There's a House of Deputies, which is made up of lay, priests, and deacons that are elected from the diocese. And then there's the House of Bishops. And so this is when we gather to enact, just like our diocesan convention, it's at General Convention where we enact changes to canons, we pass budgets, we elect people. So on a larger scale, it's what we do at a diocesan convention level. That's pretty much the...
Yeah, that's the House of Deputies. I'll just say a bit about the House of Deputies. Are there still 109 dioceses?
There's 116.
116 dioceses. And each diocese has 8 deputies on the floor of convention.
Do the math.
That's a lot of people. We elect 5 lay people and 5 clergy to be our deputation because we have an alternate, just in case we need one. Plus, it's a lot of work in a real short period of time, and so sometimes you need a break. So, so we have 10 deputies that are going to General Convention. We have 3 of them here. The Reverend Will Bryant, who is our alternate clergy deputy. Gabriel. And Wayne Schrotz, who is our alternate lay deputy. And Gordon Hamilton, oh my, Gordon, that just went right out of my head. Who is a lay deputy. And the others are not here today, but they're going to be a really good deputation. So.
Yeah, and so much like in our secular government, the things that are happening may feel distant and removed from our parish life. They in fact have significant impacts on the way that we operate in a day-to-day world. And the thing that changes those operations are called resolutions, okay? So if you could give us your, people who will remember the I'm Just a Bill song, right, on Capitol Hill, what would be your I'm Just a Resolution process? How does a resolution go from being drafted to being passed?
It would be easier to explain the Trinity. So a couple things to kind of preface that. Because you will hear people say they're deputies to General Convention, they're not delegates. And there's a distinction here because you send delegates to the diocesan convention. And the idea is that delegates, you have given them the authority to vote in a particular way on behalf of your community. Deputies are to vote their conscience based on what they believe to be what the diocese is feeling or where they're at. So deputies are not under any obligation to vote a particular way. Also, bishops, we're completely different. There is no, well, you vote this way. We don't tell each other how to vote. We often share on issues. We talk about it. We'll gather during the convention and share some thoughts as we're wrestling with stuff as a way of just keeping in touch. So essentially, and the reason I know this answer is because I'm on dispatch of business. So I am one of 5 people in the House of Bishops, not only during General Convention, but anytime we meet. We're the ones that keep the business of the House moving. We determine the agendas. We determine what we vote on, what we don't vote on. There are various places where a resolution can come from a General Convention. It can come from a diocese. It can come from individuals. It can come from committees and commissions of the Episcopal Church. It can originate with a deputy. It could originate with a bishop out of the House of Bishops. And so they're all given, what's that? Provinces as well. We're part of Province 4. So they can come from a variety of places. And so the challenge is that we often, well, not often, pretty much most of the time, get more resolutions than we can possibly handle because they come from all different places. Sometimes, well, not sometimes, more often than not, you will get resolutions that maybe you will see 25 resolutions that deal with the same subject, and it comes from different places. So often committees and commissions' job is to look at those and see, if not, they can boil them down. But essentially the process is they either can originate in the House of Deputies. So this is where our bicameral government, when you talk about the United States government. So the House of Deputies can initiate a resolution. They send it over once they've passed it to the House of Bishops. The House of Bishops has to concur to that same resolution, the exact language. If we so much as change a word, it's got to go back to the House of Deputies as well. And so the idea being in our government structure in the Episcopal Church is that neither house can essentially push something on the other. We have to come to an agreement. And that's usually where it gets complicated. I'll give you a quick story. 2018, in a normal general convention where we had 10 days, we had 539 pieces of resolutions. In 2022, when it was a truncated and we didn't have a normal general convention, it was just those that were deputies and bishops, so because of COVID, we were supposed to show restraint. And we had a 4-day or 5-day convention, and we had 482 pieces of legislation. There's where the trouble begins. And so part of it is that the dockets are pretty hard and heavy, and dispatch of business on both sides is trying to keep legislation moving. And so the challenge is that trying to boil it down so either committees can get those issues before us and take 20 or so and reduce it to something that most can agree. But it has to do this back and forth until both houses are in fact in agreement. So again, it will continue the process during convention. Committees and commissions will meet during that time. They may alter, change. Stuff may be sent back to committee to work. So think of like a legislative process in most situations. You've got committees and commissions constantly meeting, refining, retooling, and then you've got the houses that are trying to pass the final products as they're bouncing back and forth.
We work hard. There are several committees. I think we have 18 this year, maybe?
Yeah, that's about right.
18 committees, and they are composed of members from both the House of Deputies and the House of Bishops. We meet together, we vote separately on bills. And the first place that a resolution goes is to a committee. So every single one of those 500 plus resolutions has to be reviewed by a committee before it ever hits the floor. So this year I'm on the Environmental Stewardship and Care of Creation Committee. So any resolutions that have to do with the environment will come to our committee. Gordon is on racial.
Truth telling, recognition, and healing.
So any resolution that has to do with discrimination, racism will go before Gordon's committee. Because this year they are making general convention about 6 or 7 days, but we can't do all the work in that amount of time. And so the committees have already started meeting. We're meeting on Zoom, and you're welcome to come to the committee meetings. So if you go to the General Convention website, and it's really easy to find, you just put in 81st General Convention or General Convention 2024, it'll take you right to it. And on the website, you can see all the resolutions that are coming up. You can see when the committees are meeting. You can sign up to attend the committees. And if you want to say something at the hearings, so there'll be committee meetings and there'll be hearings, at the hearings you can actually sign up to speak. So it really gives the wider church more opportunity to have input into the resolutions, into what the committees are doing. Sometimes those committee meetings are at weird times of the day because you have to understand that we have members on our committee who live in Europe, who live in Province 9, which is Central and South America, and all over the United States, all over the continental United States, and Hawaii. So some of the times for those committee meetings may seem to be a little weird. That's why.
The other thing too to note, if you go to that site, you can look up by topic.
Yeah.
So if you want to see a particular, if there's a resolution, you could put in, Middle East, you can put in insurance, you can put whatever, and there's keywords, and it'll pull them all up, and it'll show all the resolutions, regardless of where they originated on that topic. And so it's a really good thing if you're interested to see the kinds of things or a particular topic, and you want to know what's kind of going before the church. The great thing is that we are actually in the 21st century in our church, so all of us are issued iPads, and so the minute we change legislation, it's automatically updated. So we don't have big reams of paper and all that. We have this technology, and so as dispatch of business, when we're done and we shoot it over, it pops up on their screens, and their dispatch can see that it's up. So it does help to have that technology, and that any changes are made, we can literally have it instantaneously. So it does make business go a little easier, but you can imagine that's a lot of stuff to go through. That's why dispatch of business in the House of Deputies and the House of Bishops is so important, because we're the ones that are supposed to keep that train moving. And so in our case, every time the presiding bishop looks over at us, we're supposed to have it ready to go. This is what's next, this is what's next. And the idea is that we're being as efficient and effective, but also doing the deliberation necessary. So the technology does help. So you're not having paper being updated. Could you imagine that?
All the voting is done electronically as well, so there are instantaneous results for the voting. As Bishop has said earlier, we also elect people to various and sundry things. So there are elections that go on during the General Convention as well. And of course, this year, the big election will be for the new presiding bishop. And how that works is the House of Bishops elects the presiding bishop. So they will meet one morning at Grace Cathedral. It's kind of like the white smoke deal, because they get locked in. They take their phones away from them. And when they elect a presiding bishop, then it comes to the House of Deputies for us to affirm the election. So the House of Deputies is also involved in that process.
Yeah, so now that we've got a clear sense of the mechanics of how convention might work, we get to ask the more interesting question, which is, what are some of the hot button topics of this convention? Kristi, you alluded to one thing. I feel like if anyone watches The Bachelor, right, they do their before the finale, there's a guy who gets to ask the questions and get everyone kind of riled up. That's my role here.
Note to self.
Yeah.
Father Mike watches The Bachelor.
I don't, but I've seen other people watch it. I've seen others watch it.
It's hard.
Well, I'll start because Kristi mentioned it. The election of the presiding bishop is probably the biggest thing. Everybody's asking. I'm on the joint nominating committee for the presiding bishop, so I actually know who's in the running. And so we will have a retreat coming up where we'll get the semifinalists. We've been at this for over a year and a half, and so we will announce the slate to the larger church on April 2nd. So on April 2nd, you will all know who is the slate for bishops. And just like Kristi said, we will be sequestered. The cathedral is on lockdown. There will only be one entrance and exit. It will be secured. There will be no electronic devices. The Wi-Fi will be cut because the bishops have a way of doing business that we're under an obligation, and we could be disciplined if we don't. So we cannot communicate with the outside world until we're done. And when we're done means that somebody has actually gone over from the House of Bishops, inform them, and the consent is made, and the affirmation. If there's no affirmation, we remain locked up and continue to go forward, but that hasn't happened, and so let's hope it doesn't this time. Outside of that, the biggest ones seem to be still the denominational health plan, which is something I'm really involved in, and the bishops are moving to try to find some better alternatives and less costly approach to our insurance that we provide to our clergy and to our lay people. Title IV, which you probably read more than you care to, which is the disciplinary canons of our church that deal with how we discipline clergy. One of the biggest issues of contention is how we discipline bishops. Just Google that, and you'll have more than you want to read about. That'll be a big issue, and also anything, there's going to be a lot of discussion about liturgies of the church. One of the things you should note is in the House of Bishops, it's different than the House of Deputies. When they're in committee, everything that they pass automatically goes to a consent calendar in the House of Deputies. It doesn't in the House of Bishops. Unless a bishop, they vote to designate it and put it there, or we as dispatch take it off. And we've made a commitment in the House of Bishops that anything that deals with canonical change, discipline, liturgy, prayer book, we immediately take off the consent calendar and debate all those issues as bishops. We don't let anything liturgical or anything concerning discipline or canon changes go on a consent calendar. So those are always the biggest ones, and they will continue to be, in my opinion, in the House of Bishops this summer.
So one of the things that is coming up that I just read about, because not nearly all the resolutions are posted yet, but the church has had a task force for the last 2 years on mental health. And that task force has submitted 7 resolutions. And among those resolutions is a requirement that all clergy have mental health training. Like we have to have dismantling racism and we have to have safeguarding God's people, we will also have to be trained in mental health issues. I, for one, think that's a great idea, but I know that's something that will affect all churches, and so I think that's one of the things, and we often have resolutions that will affect the local parish. And so I think that's why I suggest you go to the General Convention website, take a look at some of the resolutions that may pass. I could see, they're also recommending that each diocese has somebody who's trained in mental health first aid to be a trainer. That will have an impact on all of us. And I could see them coming down the road and requiring the mental health training just like they do dismantling racism and safeguarding God's people if you have any position in the church. So that's just an example of the kinds of things that we deal with at convention that will have an impact on you as Trinity Church Asheville.
So let me add one thing to it, because this is a perfect, somebody asked me the other day, they said, so Bishop, this process is kind of like the House of Representatives and the Senate, the way we're set up. And that's not true. Here's why I tell you it's not. Because a more accurate representation would be representatives in a House of Governors. And this is what I've tried to explain to people, the distinction, because what Kristi just mentioned is a perfect example of why we're a House of Governors. That's because those of us in the House of Bishops are the ones tasked with implementing everything that gets passed. So one of the challenges of this structure of the General Convention, which has been a discussion for a very long time, is that everything that's passed comes ultimately the responsibility of a bishop of the diocese to enact the policy, to set up the structure, to design the training, or whatever. So that's often an issue that's a big consideration. I've made it my personal practice that any time the legislation comes forward for us to vote that is unfunded, I always vote no. Because it's unwielding often in the church. And my frustration is we often really get excited to pass a lot of things, but we never talk about how they're actually going to happen. And one of the things I have as a bishop to worry about all the time is how do I get all these things enacted when there's no resources being given to the larger church. So my general practice has been, and to borrow the term, unfunded mandate. And that's where we've been pushing a lot over these last number of years, is if we're going to get serious about mental health, if we're going to make some things priorities, then the church needs to put money behind those things and needs to determine what are those priorities. And so that's one of the challenges of our current structure of General Convention, is that whatever deputies ultimately vote, it always becomes the responsibility of the bishop of that diocese. So that's why sometimes there's discussion or a little bit more disagreement, because sometimes the bishops are looking at it for saying, how is this going to be possible if there's no money coming from the Episcopal Church to implement this? So that's one of the things I think we've gotten better, and the budget process has gotten a lot better. So there's people looking at that to say, if we're going to make these kinds of things, then we need to figure out how to provide those resources to dioceses so they can do it. So this is just a good little example of nobody's in dispute about the need of that, but where we're always pushing is, okay, if it's serious enough and we think it's big, then we've got to put the money there. So I think there's going to be a lot of issues this summer where we're really going to talk seriously about the budget and what our priorities are. So anyway, that's something that I share because I do think it's a more accurate description to say it's a room full of, if you will, governors. Because we're staring down what we need to do to actually enact whatever the number ends up being, 300 or whatever we end up passing. And bishops are required to not only go through all those, but to figure out how we're addressing them. And I, as the bishop, have to report back how we're implementing all those resolutions. And so those of you who've been to diocesan convention, you've always noticed there's a part where we have to verbally read out, because some of those resolutions require us to read them at convention into the record as part of that requirement. And if I don't, yours truly gets in trouble. So we're the ones that have to go through at the end of a convention and actually look at all those resolutions and see if we're conforming, if we're in good stead with them, and if we're doing the changes necessary, and that we're starting to enact those various resolutions.
And let me just quickly talk about the budget, because that's one of the areas that the first time I went to General Convention, I thought, the cart and the horse are really messed up on this one. So the budget for the next triennium will be voted on at General Convention, and it's already out. But we will also have mandates in the form of resolutions that come to us that are asking for money, and sometimes big money, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. They may or may not be in the budget. And so one of the things that we have to be cognizant of is there any place in the budget where if we pass this resolution that's going to give XYZ $150,000, where is it going to come from? So I've always been, it's hard. And so that's one of those areas that I'm not sure the church has got it right yet.
Well, thank you for your responses and for all that we've learned today. We may have a moment for a couple of brief questions. Does anyone in the audience have a question they'd like to ask?
What are the biggest issues coming up before the convention? You know, what's dominating the thinking and the politicking and all that goes on?
Well, this is my perspective on it obviously is going to be different, because one of the realities is that, and bishops talk about this all the time, is we do this 24/7. So one of the advantages that bishops has is we're always meeting. We're always in community. So without a general convention, we always meet in a spring meeting and a fall meeting. When there's a general convention like this summer, we have a spring meeting, which we just had. We won't have one in the fall. So it's a little bit different because the bishops are constantly dealing with a variety of issues on a day-to-day, month-to-month situation. So when we gather, because in between convention, we're implementing a lot of these issues, we're dealing with the issues that are rising up. So my answer will probably be different. And for us right now, as bishops, we continue to deal with the issue of discipline. Discipline of the church. There's been a series of cases lately. Again, you can just Google. You can look at Episcopal News Service. It's gotten a lot of attention. And there's been a lot of concern, especially among bishops, about how this process is being run, how the process of providing fair and accessible process for all is a big concern. Many of us believe that right now the disciplinary process is broken. And so that's a big issue dominating right now, and bishops spend a lot of time having that conversation in the House of Bishops meeting. The other one that will continue, and Kristi just mentioned it, with a new presiding bishop, there's going to be big conversations about what's the budget and what are the priorities going forward with the new presiding bishop, who will resume or who will take that position officially in November of this year. So there's a lot of issues within the House that we're thinking about, mission-based, budget, disciplinary issues, as well as the liturgy. That's another one that we're always as bishops.
I think we have time for one more question, if anyone has another question that they'd like to ask.
Where is the convention this year?
Louisville, Kentucky.
Right.
Every time I say it around the Bishop of Kentucky, he goes, it's Louisville. So Louisville. By the way, also on the website of General Convention, and I think we probably might have shared, I can't remember, but anybody can go and volunteer. There's always volunteers. Imagine over a period of this time, there's going to be about 15,000 Episcopalians going through Louisville. Because not only do you have the deputies, the bishops, but all sorts of wonderful organizations, missions, religious orders, people who are doing work in the Episcopal Church all over the world are there, and the Expo Center is amazing. Not only is it all the kinds of latest vestments and stuff that you could possibly want, but there's all sorts of groups doing amazing mission work all over the world, people who are creating curriculum for schools. It's amazing what goes on there. And so if you want an opportunity, volunteer, you can get badged, and you can help and see how this thing works. You can sit in the House of Deputies gallery, you can come to the House of Bishops gallery and watch. And it really stresses you to learn how it works, see it firsthand, and to meet Episcopalians from all over. It really is it's meant to be a reunion as well as business, but you can go on the website, volunteer, because they're always looking, and I would encourage you at some point, if you have interest, not only volunteer, but think about running to be a deputy as well.
Amen. One other quick thing. There's going to be a revival on Saturday night, June the 22nd. And hopefully, if Bishop Curry continues to improve, it will be his last time of preaching.
Well, his last big revival.
His big revival. And everybody is invited to that. As a matter of fact, we've gotten a lot of emails encouraging us to encourage, if we're within driving distance, and we are, encouraging people to come up to Louisville for that Saturday night revival. And let me tell you, having seen Bishop Curry do a revival, wow, it will be something to behold. So if you can get away that weekend, you may not be able to stay in Louisville proper, because there will be a lot of Episcopalians that proper, but I'm sure you can find a hotel room somewhere and think about coming up for the revival. It'll be great.
Well, let's give a warm round of applause for the Let us go to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.